and she's got expertise in marketing, processing, loyalty, and incentives. She's got 25 years of experience in business strategy, product management, and marketing in the financial services and payments industries. Prior to joining the Aite group, she was a senior manager of product strategy and new service development at FIS. Prior to that, she ran an independent consulting practice focused on new business and marketing strategies for large banks and corporations. She's participated in all of the aspects of the payments industry vertical and has had senior roles at First Data Corporation, Nationwide Corporation, and First Union. She's also worked at MasterCard International and Bank of New York. With a BS in Business Administration from the American University and studies at Northwestern's Kellogg School. So when she talks, you can rest assured that she knows what she's talking about. So please join me in welcoming Madeline Aufseeser.
About a couple of weeks ago, I was up in New York visiting with my nephews. I've got a 10-year-old nephew, and he asked me, what do you do for a living? And it's just so difficult to explain in this space. It's a very complicated business. And I was in the process of writing a blog on the impacts of the Durbin Amendment. So I tried to explain it as diligently as I possibly could, and he went to school the next day and came back with this drawing that he was so anxious to show me. I loved it. It was such a keeper. So now I would like to say, if Dick was in the room, maybe he would be falling off the cliff and the bankers would be on the other side of that picture. Today we're going to talk about winners and losers relative to the Durbin Amendment. Now, you've heard a lot of this already this afternoon, so there's going to be some similar themes coming out of this particular presentation. Obviously, we know some of these major implications. So the merchants now have the upper hand. They can route transactions. It's coming at the expense of the banks, obviously, and the biggest losers in the equation outside of the consumers, right, because they are the collateral damage, even though the amendment was geared towards trying to help the consumers. But the other biggest losers are obviously Visa and potentially MasterCard as well. So we know the scales have tipped in favor of merchants, but not all merchants have had the same benefits from the interchange regulation as others, right? So the big box stores, the Walmarts, the Best Buys, the Home Depots all have great negotiating powers with their acquiring relationships, and of course they're going to get all the benefits associated with interchange. However, those same merchants, I don't see any of them giving anything back to the consumers on that front, even though that was the case that they pled back to Dick in trying to get this amendment passed. But they certainly are now in control of all the routing associated with the transactions for debit and for prepaid type relationships. They've got the leverage. And they will start to do some transaction steering. Their cash register systems, their point-of-sale systems are all geared to try to find the lowest cost routing methods. And they possibly could be in a position to lobby for more cuts on interchange relative to credit card. However, I think coming into an election year, I think the legislature has bigger issues to fry than to, keep pounding away at the banks and implementing more regulation, which quite frankly, they don't really even have the feet on the street to try to enforce and oversee. So large merchants definitely gain some leverage. Now the small merchants, on the other hand, they're in a little bit tougher position. They don't have any negotiating power with the acquirers. We've already seen a number of acquirers come right out and say that they're not going to give anything back to the small merchants. So that actually could create a market opportunity for some entrepreneurial initiatives for companies to come in and sell software solutions to some of these smaller merchants to help with some of the routing issues that they may have. As well, potentially, if banks succeed in getting consumers to migrate transactions to the credit side of the equation, the merchants actually might lose more, right? Because now the interchange rate for credit obviously is higher, so it could end up costing some of these small merchants more money rather than less. So kind of not such a great scenario for the small merchants, even though seemingly on the surface you would think that they would have an advantage. Now let's talk about the networks. You know, I talk to bankers every day of the week, and I can't tell you how bad the sentiment is towards Visa. On the other hand, they sit there and kind of shrug their shoulders about what they're going to do about it, right? But the sentiment of the week that's been coming out and top-line surface is Visa's just the bully on the block, right? They're going to do whatever they can to preserve their revenue stream. However, in doing so, their influences are certainly eroding, as well as their revenues, right? So on the debit side of the house, Visa has the most to lose. They own 80% of the debit market today. So consequently, you know, their revenue stream is going to definitely go down. However, they are trying to start to do some things to disintermediate the revenue erosion, right? One of the things that they've done recently, and I don't know how many of you all know this, but they've actually now are mandating that issuers be able to accept a PIN-authorized signature-based transaction, okay? So what are they doing? They're lowering the cost of fraud. They're making signature more attractive, right? And now giving users another means to do debit transaction on the signature rails, which is what's going to preserve their income over the long term. Now, MasterCard, on the other hand, thinks they have some advantage in the market because they don't own a big chunk of the debit market, so they think they can go in and try to acquire more share. But that's going to come at an expense. They're actually probably going to end up paying issuers to move their portfolios over from Visa to MasterCard. And a number of bankers have actually shared with me that they are, in fact, in negotiation with MasterCard to see what they can do about making a switch. But now there's a problem with that as well, right? Because they might want to make a switch on debit, but then now MasterCard has mandated some things relative to being able to accept EMV at the ATM terminals. So they've got some conflicting concepts in there that might cost on one hand and benefit on another hand. So, you know, it's interesting to see how things are going to shake out, but we are certainly at an inflection point in the market relative to these two traditional powerhouse brands, which leaves opportunity for others in the market. So as we know, the network choices reduces debit card transaction, it's going to erode market share, and eventually it's going to erode the revenue for Visa and MasterCard. And there's lots of choice in the market at this point relative to routing, especially with two unaffiliated networks. So the ability to have the second network on the card could potentially grow incremental transaction volume for some of the regional networks. So you've got Star and Pulse and NICE out there all thinking about, okay, now what am I going to do in this crazy new environment? So all three of those networks, some of them are sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what's going to happen, but they're all looking at new product features as a way to maybe take a chunk of this business away from the major brands. And actually, a couple of them are actually testing new products as well relative to pinless or signatureless transactions at the point of sale. So we might see some competing products to the traditional pay wave type concept coming from some of the regional networks. But they do have an opportunity to come in now and be the favored child, if you will, with some of the bank issuers relative to Visa and MasterCard, especially with the sentiment around Visa and MasterCard. Some of the smaller institutions are looking at going exclusively to PIN-based transactions on some of the smaller networks, or trying to route the consumers to do that and do some consumer education on the value of using a PIN at the point of sale. The other thing that's coming out of this is every single one of the networks is looking at major fraud reduction initiatives as a way to improve the economics associated with the debit transactions. Because now, you know, there's no real upside on the revenue side, but if there's a way to contain costs, and of course the biggest opportunity in containing cost is in the fraud side of the arena. So everybody's taking a look at how they can reduce fraud. The alternative payment networks. Now, this is really interesting, right? Because this whole space is heating up. And there's some opportunity here with brands like Google, who's been mentioned quite a number of times today, as well as PayPal, to come in and disintermediate the market. We could very easily see a new network emerge. I think PayPal actually is in the best position to do that over the long term. They have a trusted brand. They have merchants signed up already. They've announced a number of programs that they're doing. They're offering an alternative to NFC through cloud-based mobile, digital wallet type of scenarios. So they have an opportunity, and they don't have the infrastructure associated with some of the existing networks. So I would say to the banks, and I would say to the networks, watch out. Because PayPal's coming. Whether we like it or not, we need to acknowledge it and watch what they're doing because they are also at an inflection point in the market and they can come in and capture some significant business at this point in time. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years. I love this slide. And we had a whole bunch of merchant acquiring companies up here earlier today, right? And they're all talking about how there's pretty much a neutral impact to their business. Well, you know what? I don't necessarily agree with that. I have a slightly different impression, quite frankly. I think that if you are in the processing business today, regardless of what side of the equation you are on, everybody's going to be looking to squeeze your margin. Okay? Merchants are going to be coming back and saying, guess what? The interchange rate cap was not at 12 cents, it's at 21 cents, and you, Mr. Acquirer, has to find me more savings. What are you going to do to make me stay with you, right? Because there's plenty of merchant acquirers out there. So I think, on the short term, they're able to capitalize with some of the smaller retailers and being able to keep the delta on that interchange rate cap within their discount rates. But in the long run, I think they're going to suffer from margin compression. So I don't think there's any doubt about that. And you've got to recognize where most of the transactions are coming from today. It's from the bigger retailers who have the negotiation power. So that margin will get squeezed. Now, on the issuing side, on the processing side of the house, this is an old story. Banks have been coming back to a processor year after year after year. You charge me too much money. It doesn't cost this much to process these transactions. And they keep squeezing the margin for these processors. I saw it when I was at FIS. 2 years ago, we were renegotiating contracts in the middle of the terms in order to get the pricing down so that they wouldn't lose the client's business. So now, especially that, issuers have lost all this revenue, well, they're going to be going back to their processors. What can you do to make this process more efficient? What are you going to do to keep my business? So we could see some churn in the business. There's still quite a few processors out there in the marketplace, so there's plenty of competition, which provides a runway for either renegotiation or pulling the business out and going someplace else. Not that that's an easy feat. So it's really hard to disengage from an existing processor, but you could see some of this activity start to happen. The other piece where you're going to see it is on prepaid business, because the prepaid business, most of it is processed out of house today. Very little of it is processed in house by any of the prepaid program managers or any of the banks. Third-party networks. How did they get that exemption? That's what I want to know. American Express and Discover, they're kind of out there by themselves. So in all of this, did you see today's announcement? Amex just landed Target's debit card business today. That was in the American Banker this morning. So Amex is really going to be the big winner in all of this. Their prepaid business is growing by leaps and bounds. They announced since the beginning of the summer, this is now the third program they've introduced, right? So they came out with a GPR product earlier in the summer, a general purpose reloadable product. They came out with a teen product right on the heels of that, and now they've got the Target debit card business. So it's going to be interesting. They have an opportunity here to start partnering with some of the banks. Not that their interchange rate's going to be any better on the debit business, but certainly they have some opportunities big time in prepaid. I would say the same is true of Discover on the prepaid side of the business, but they're not as aggressive as American Express in this field. American Express has also made a huge namesake for itself in the gift card business. They have more than 100 million cards outstanding in their systems. So they've proven that they can make gift card work, and a gift card is an even thinner margin business than on the reloadable prepaid products. So I would expect to see American Express to really blossom over the next couple of years in this particular space. So big numbers, right? Really, really big numbers. So I did a sizing earlier in the summer after the Durbin announcement was made. And if you look at all the banks that are above $10 billion in assets, we're looking at, an $8.3 billion revenue shortfall per year. That's just a huge amount of money. Absolutely huge. I don't think Dick has any clue that this is what he was doing, quite frankly. So this is the impact to the bank. So of course they're looking for new revenue sources, and some of it they'll be able to replace, but for the most part they're just going to have to take the hit and move on. And it is time for them to move on and start looking at other things. The one thing I do think that's going to come out of it is a hell of a lot of innovation. So let's hope we do start to see the banks get back on the innovation bandwagon. And they have a problem, right? There's no way out of the exemptions. Certainly not on debit. And on prepaid, what we're starting to see for the big issuers, you saw U.S. Bank made an announcement about 2 weeks ago of a new GPR program that they are launching or relaunching into the business. Some of the other big regional banks like BB&T have also announced a re-entrance into the prepaid market. It's a little bit different than what I had expected, quite frankly. I thought some of the big banks would be pulling back from the prepaid market, but no, they're actually going out in full force with prepaid, but they're doing it in a slightly different way. So what they're doing now is they're going to have a two-tiered structure type product offering, right, where one structure or one product offering goes out to the market, and it's not a fully featured card. So they'll eliminate things like bill pay. They'll eliminate some of the freebies on, unlimited customer service and things like that. But it'll be a bare bones reloadable prepaid product for the general population. But then if you want bill pay as a consumer, then you might have to pay a little extra every month. But then what that means for them is that they're really going to have to educate the market on how to use these cards and the value associated with the prepaid accounts. So I think the issuers who are in this particular space are going to get very active in it. Some of the issuers are obviously going to try to migrate customers off of debit onto credit on the higher end of the spectrum. I think we're starting to see some of that. And obviously, all the press on Bank of America within the last couple of weeks, we know, so they're not going to charge on a debit card, but what are they going to do? They're going to raise minimum balance requirements. They're going to charge for other services that they haven't been charged for, and free checking no longer exists in this country. Just doesn't. But why should it? So I would ask that question. Why should free checking exist? Today we pay for Sirius Radio. We pay for cable television. We never paid for those things 20 and 30 years ago. We pay to have gas and electricity delivered to our homes before we even turn the lights on. So, that's the message that's got to go back out to the consumers, is that, free checking, sorry, it's gone, and let's go vote Dick out of office. Okay, the large bank dilemma. So here's more. What are they going to do? They're going to cut features. They're going to raise the account fees. They're going to add new services, but those new services will come with fees, and they're going to migrate the customers. And we talked about really what they're going to do on the prepaid front as well. So, but some of them could exit the business altogether on prepaid. But surprisingly, I don't think they will. One of the interesting stats that I heard from one banker a couple of weeks ago was on their prepaid portfolio, on their GPR portfolio. They have a branch distribution model, and they also sell prepaid cards through malls and through a major supermarket chain. The difference between those three programs was hugely significant. So for the branch-based distributed GPR cards, they were getting 4 times the load value on those cards than what they were seeing for the supermarket program or the mall program. So they had a lot of incentive to continue their prepaid program just because the deposit amounts were that much higher going onto the cards, which obviously means those cards are going to get more usage and have a much longer life to them. So that's why these programs are valuable to the banks. Now, the small debit card issuers, they've got a little bit tougher challenge. They're still exempt from the rules, but they're subject to the merchant routing choices that are being made. So, if the merchant chooses to route on the least cost rail, that's going to eat into their profit margin and eat into their revenue streams. And for the most part, they're kind of sitting on the sidelines. They really do not know what to do. They don't know if they should raise their minimum balance requirements, change their checking account fees. They see an opportunity to bring new customers in the door, but at what cost and at what price? So they're kind of sitting there not really understanding what to do, and they don't want to be the leaders in the market because they don't want to upset the apple cart with their existing clientele. So they're really kind of sitting on the sidelines. So at the end of the day, it's probably a net sum loss to them because they're going to see a deduction in their revenue growth. Now, there's a whole group of prepaid issuers that are program managers that have under $10 billion in assets. So, these are the companies like NetSpend, Western Union, Ready Financial. There's a whole group of them that stand or have an opportunity now to really grow their businesses significantly. And we're starting to see that. They're stepping up. They're going to be marketing more. Their market audience just expanded. Because for those consumers that can no longer afford a traditional DDA relationship, they're going to be looking for an alternative product. As well as a couple of people have mentioned earlier today, the demographics in the marketplace are changing, right? So the younger populations don't have the affinity towards banks like they've had in the past. And what's the difference between a checking account that's being offered in a bank today and a general purpose reloadable card? Essentially, the features and the functions are more or less the same. The one major difference is there's no physical checks associated with a prepaid card. So why not go with an alternative provider? And if an alternative provider, or if the big banks have such a poor reputation, there's another reason to take a look and see who else is out in the market who can offer them a product of value, right? And some of these companies that are in this space do a pretty nice job and have pretty different types of distribution models available to reach this particular audience. So, plus they have some opportunities to co-brand with some larger institutions that now maybe don't want to get into the prepaid business so that they could co-brand it through some of these other companies and perhaps get some kind of a commission for offering a card. So NetSpend is the case that I like to use in point because they do white label or private label some of the prepaid products for other providers, not under the NetSpend name. Okay, so there's a couple of things that are still outstanding relative to the Durbin Amendment that the Fed did not come up with specific rules on. One of them is there's a requirement out there that the banks have to file information every 2 years on the cost of their interchange, right? And they have to submit this whole set of, what's happened with their business, what are the costs associated with processing these transactions. Well, the Fed hasn't provided any guidelines associated with how to do this, and they haven't implemented anything as of yet. So what I say is even when they do implement something, the banks are going to be shipping data off to some warehouse someplace, and it's going to sit on a floor in a vacant room because the Fed doesn't even have the feet on the street to start auditing or looking at what's going on. They can't hire anybody because there's no tax base to look at whether these companies are in compliance or not. So even though this rule is still hanging out there, there's nothing being done about it right now. The same would be said about payroll cards. There's still a huge question mark that's been promulgated back to the Fed on, okay, is a payroll card product, is it under the rule or not? The state of California tried to make it under the rule, but then that got thrown out of court. So the states are trying to come in and set some precedences as well, but that's not going over too well in the market. So has anybody heard about decoupled debit? Does anybody know any decoupled debit programs around anymore? They're gone. Totally gone. This is a fallout based of the business. There was one company, I forget the name of it actually, but it went under right after the Durbin Amendment was announced. The business model for decoupled debit was based off interchange. Margin's gone, so the business is gone. Need I say more? I mean, you know, the poor consumer. Really, somebody said it earlier today, they're getting hit twice. It really is true. You know, Walmart's not giving money back to anybody. I don't care what they told Dick. But they're not going to lower their prices because now they got a couple of pennies cut off every single transaction. It's just not going to happen. On the other side, what is happening is the banks are all raising their fees. So the consumer really does lose in this whole equation. And it's too bad. You know, I wish those Stand Up America folks really understood this better because maybe they would, you know, have a little bit different stance on what they're doing. So what's next? Where's the industry going? We're in a situation now where obviously there's an inflection point in the market. Everybody's talked about this today in one shape, form, or another. There's a perfect storm brewing in the face of banking today, with especially in regard when you look at the whole industry of banking, right? You can't make money on deposits. The deposits aren't being used to fund loans because no banks are making loans anymore, so there's no earnings that are coming out of that. You've got revenue streams that have been cut, and you've got consumers who hate banks. So we're really at a significant change within the industry that means people are going to have to rise up and do something and change the direction that the market's going in, which does, you know, present a different opportunity for other players in the market. There's going to be, if the banks step away from prepaid or the underserved markets, there's going to be a deficit in the marketplace. Now, that may not happen, because I am seeing the growth in the banks that I did not expect to see or the attention being paid to these products, which is really a good thing. But if some issuers do decide to exit the business, ultimately it does hurt the consumer because there's less competition in the market and there's less product available in the market. So this still, you know, remains to be seen how this is going to be playing out. But essentially it's going to mean less access for consumers overall, which, you know, is not necessarily a good thing for them or for competition. I think we will see a shift in the market. I'm betting on American Express, quite frankly, and Discover. I think they do have an opportunity to gain share and take some prestige away from MasterCard and Visa in particular. And I think we will see them expand their prepaid offerings, and we already have with American Express. So what should the banks do? It's time to innovate. It's time to, you know, get off the rocker, start investing more money in technology, and start really looking at what's the consumer value proposition that they bring to the table. They need to refocus their energies and move on. Quite frankly, I think this is the last time I'm going to give this presentation because it is time to move on, and nobody really wants to talk about this issue any longer. Merchant-funded incentive programs. We heard a lot about that this morning. There was a host of folks up here who talked about their businesses. This is a great opportunity, and it's really a way to bring value back to consumers in the form of, you know, a debit relationship, having a reward program associated with it, which could be a revenue stream for the banks. So I think those are a definite win-win for companies. And then, of course, you know, the whole mobile payment space. Obviously, that's emerging. I think, you know, to somebody else's point earlier, that within a year we're going to see a proliferation of this. I think it's going to take us probably closer to 6 years before we get to a tipping point on the point-of-sale devices being enabled and ready to really accept mobile devices. Average life on point-of-sale devices is in the neighborhood of 7 to 10 years. And if you know, or maybe you don't know this, but there's probably 11.2 million merchants out there, and there's probably only 600,000 devices that are actually NFC ready to accept mobile payments. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the merchant side of this equation to make this shift occur. More regulation and reform. Yeah, it's coming. Probably not in 2012. It's an election year, so it's not going to happen. But we can't continue to count on credit card interchange. A reliance on that would be a foolish move. It's going to go away, be it through regulation or competition. That revenue stream is going to erode. So the card companies are really going to have to take a hard look at this and start figuring out how they're going to replace this revenue and what they're going to do to attract and retain consumers also with a good value proposition for them. So again, it's time to reinvent the business. And worldwide implications. A couple of people have mentioned Australia today. They did have a debacle with this whole interchange cap. I don't know if anybody knows it, but France actually, the minute we enacted rules, the French government went ahead and tried to do the same thing. But the consumer advocacy groups in France actually stood up against it and recommended against it. I wish they had done that here as opposed to the way they treated it. But, you know, the rest of the world really looks to the U.S. to see what we're doing in the payment space because we're considered to be more innovative on some fronts than in others. So they're watching us to see what's going to happen. So it could prompt other governments to do some things as well. And, you know, regardless of where everybody else is, the United States still does represent the largest free market government in the world. So if we've taken action on something, the spotlight's on us and everybody else is looking at it. So in summary, you know, it's still that $8.3 billion number. It's huge. It's serious. It's impactful. Everybody's been talking about it all day long. So we all know that it hurts. On the flip side, it's an opportunity in the market. Consumers are the biggest losers, so what are we going to do to win their hearts back? We need to win their hearts back, their minds back, and their trust. And that just creates the need in the marketplace for somebody to step in with the best mousetrap to do that and change where we are today. So with that, I'll open up the floor for any questions that anybody may have. Oh my gosh, everybody must want a cocktail. Well, thank you for your time today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dave.
I think the answer is yes. Everybody does want a cocktail. Before we go out, let me just give a couple of thanks and a few housekeeping notes. First, as I said this morning, we could not be standing here today at the price point at which we're standing here today without our gold sponsors for TAG FinTech. We have charter gold sponsors of Elevon, Fiserv, Raymond James. We have gold sponsors of Alston & Bird, Cyber, Control Scan, Crow Horvath, Grant Thornton, Haba Fair, Getty & Wynn, KPMG, Nelson Mullins, Porter Cadle Moore, RSA, Slalom Consulting, TSYS. We also could not be standing here today without some incredible work by a series of really special people. Don Campbell and Deborah Cox have provided unbelievable leadership in getting this program presented. Sean Banks carried the load. It was his vision for the panels, his execution in getting it done, with an amazing committee that helped him. Beth Westbrook, Laura Snyder, Scott Mills, Kim Humphreys, Derek Howard, Barbara Martin, Melanie Brandt, and Laura Jones. And then when you think about the quality that you got today, think about the leadership that the moderators gave us. Tim Spence, Duncan Douglas, Margaret Weichert. I'll come up with some other nicknames for Margaret after her performance today. And of course, we had amazing insights from Pete Kite, Sean Feeney, and Madeline Aufseeser. Thank you very much for coming. We are going to get a questionnaire out to you. Go ahead and mark on your calendars November 14th, 2012. You know what? I just realized that one of the most important people in this is Amelia Fox. And I hope that she stepped out so that she doesn't know that I stepped on it. But Amelia Fox has done an unbelievable job and tied in with Sean Banks. So November 14th, 2012. There are a couple of seminars that are going to be coming up. Look on the TAG FinTech website. There is an event with the Israeli Chamber of Commerce the end of February 2012 that's around FinTech. You know, the Israelis are doing amazing things in this space, and we are going to move forward with a relationship with the American-Israeli Chamber of Commerce in order to collaborate in the presentation of some of the astonishing stuff that's coming out. Okay, so I'm almost there. We've talked a lot about, there you are, Amelia. Thank you very much, madam. It's important that you individuals get involved with TAG FinTech. We need people to bring forth ideas so that we can have good presentations. We need help on the gathering the metrics for the ecosystem, and we need to follow you. The last two things that I have to do today, according to my notes, are these. One is to tell you again that parking is free. Tell the attendants at the valet and at the checkout for self-park that you're with TAG FinTech, and it'll be free. And the task that I have looked forward to today most eagerly is that I am to usher attendees to the cocktail hour. So it's one of the things I do best. The networking and watching the innovation showcase or taking a look at the innovation showcase will be right outside the hallways. Please enjoy the rest of the event. Drink tickets? Barbara has them. But I'll tell you what, we'll worry about tickets. Let's just go get in line. Thank you.